Ethan is 19, living alone in a small apartment after losing his parents in a car accident a few years back. Their absence carved a deep emptiness in him, and he withdrew from the world, spending his days in a haze of grief and loneliness. School was no escape. He was often the target of bullies, and no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't find the courage to stand up for himself. His classmates mocked him, his teachers barely noticed him, and he felt like a ghost drifting through life. Over time, the hopelessness weighed heavier on his heart, and he began to contemplate ending it all, convinced that no one would miss him. Mia, 18, had been diagnosed with a rare form of cancer when she was just a child. Her life had been defined by hospital visits, surgeries, and grueling treatments. But Mia never let the sickness define her spirit. Despite everything, she had an infectious optimism, a cheerful energy that made people around her smile. Mia treated each day as a gift, savoring small joys like the warmth of the sun on her face, the sound of laughter, and even the simple pleasure of feeling raindrops on her skin. One rainy afternoon, after a particularly bad panic attack, Ethan found himself back at the hospital, hoping the familiar environment would help settle the chaos in his mind. His breaths were still ragged, and he tried to keep himself together, clutching the edge of a bench in the lobby. Wandering through the hallways, he stopped when he saw something unusual through the glass doors. Mia, in her hospital gown, stood just outside in the rain, letting the cool drops soak her hair and clothes. She closed her eyes, tilting her head up to the sky with a peaceful smile. Ethan watched her for a long moment, fascinated by the sight. He couldn't understand how someone in a hospital gown, someone who looked as fragile as she did, could appear so serene. It made him curious, a flicker of intrigue breaking through his cloud of despair. Eventually, Mia noticed him staring and waved with a cheerful grin. "Hey, you!" she called through the glass, her voice bright and warm. "Why don't you join me? It's not as cold as it looks." Hesitant but drawn by her carefree attitude, Ethan stepped outside, feeling the rain against his skin. For a moment, they stood together in silence, each lost in their own thoughts, until Mia turned to him, her smile softening. "The rain reminds me that I'm still here, you know? Like, even when things feel heavy, it's a little reminder that I'm alive." Ethan didn't reply right away, but he found himself lingering beside her, letting her words sink in. It was a strange feeling, like a small spark of warmth inside his chest that he hadn't felt in a long time. After that day, Ethan found himself returning to the hospital more often. At first, it was just to catch another glimpse of Mia, but soon they started talking during his visits, small conversations that turned into longer chats. Mia would tell stories about the little things that brought her joy, like the time she smuggled in her favorite cookies to share with the nurses, or how she once convinced her doctor to let her decorate her IV stand with colorful ribbons. Ethan, on the other hand, shared more reluctantly at first, but Mia's genuine interest in him, her refusal to judge or pity, slowly helped him open up. He told her about losing his parents, about feeling like he didn't belong anywhere. He even admitted, in a shaky voice, that he sometimes thought about ending his life. Mia listened, her expression soft with understanding, but she never pitied him. Instead, she gently nudged him toward seeing the little moments of beauty she found in life. "You know, it's kind of amazing that we're both here right now," she'd say. "I mean, the odds were pretty small, but here we are, sharing the same rainy day." Ethan didn't notice it at first, but he began to look forward to his visits with Mia. Her positivity started to seep into him, like sunlight breaking through the dark clouds that had hovered over his mind. They'd sit together in the hospital garden, chatting about everything from the books Mia loved to read, to the dream Ethan had of traveling one day, dreams he had long buried. They shared moments of laughter, too, like the time Ethan tried to sneak in a pizza and accidentally set off the hospital's alarm, or when Mia convinced him to join her in sneaking into the restricted rooftop to watch the sunset. Those moments became the memories that filled Ethan's mind instead of his darker thoughts. With each visit, Ethan's feelings for Mia grew stronger, and he realized he wanted her to be more than just a friend. But as their bond deepened, so did the reality of Mia's condition. Her illness was progressing, and the doctors warned that she might not have much time left. Still, she never stopped smiling, never let fear overshadow the time they had together. One evening, Mia's condition took a turn for the worse, and she was rushed into emergency care. Ethan spent a sleepless night pacing the hospital halls, fear and helplessness tightening around his heart. When he was finally allowed to see her, he found her hooked up to machines, looking smaller and more fragile than he'd ever seen. But even then, Mia managed a weak smile. "Hey, Ethan," she whispered. "Guess the rain couldn't wash all the bad stuff away, huh?" Ethan squeezed her hand, fighting back tears. "You're going to get through this, Mia. I'll be right here with you every step of the way." With time, Mia's condition stabilized, and the doctors decided to attempt a risky surgery that could potentially remove the remaining cancer. Ethan stayed by her side through every step of the process, refusing to leave her alone. The surgery day arrived, and Mia's last words before being wheeled into the operating room were, "Ethan, promise me you'll keep looking for the little things, even if I'm not around, okay?" He nodded, though his heart ached at the thought of losing her. Hours stretched by, and when the doctors finally emerged, they announced that the surgery had been a success. Mia's cancer had been completely removed. She would have a long road to recovery, but there was hope. But the joy of that moment was short-lived. Just days later, Ethan was struck by a sudden illness. He felt the weakness creeping into his bones, but he brushed it aside, determined not to worry Mia. She had just come through her surgery, and the last thing he wanted was to add to her burden. So, he masked his symptoms with forced smiles and light-hearted banter, convincing himself that if he could just keep her spirits up, everything would be okay. Mia, still recovering, stayed by his side, her laughter filling the room as she recounted stories of their time together. Ethan held her hand tightly, feeling the warmth radiate from her touch. Each moment spent with her was a balm for his soul, even as his body began to betray him. "Hey, at least one of us made it out of this place, right?" He managed through blurry eyes, his voice barely above a whisper. Mia's laughter faded as she looked at him, concern etched across her face. "Ethan, you're not looking so good. Are you sure you're okay?" "Just tired," he replied, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I've been playing nurse for you too long." But deep down, he knew he was running out of time. The pain was becoming harder to ignore, but he pushed it aside for Mia's sake. Then came the day when Ethan could no longer hide his illness. He had been sitting beside Mia, sharing stories and dreams of the future, when suddenly his vision blurred, and darkness encroached on the edges of his consciousness. Before he could process what was happening, he fainted. Mia's scream pierced through the haze as she rushed to his side. Panic surged within her as she shook him gently, calling his name. "Ethan, wake up, please!" When the medical team arrived, they quickly assessed the situation and whisked him away. Mia's heart raced in her chest as she followed them, fear gripping her tightly. In the sterile room filled with beeping machines and hushed voices, Mia felt helpless. It wasn't supposed to be like this. They were supposed to be celebrating their victories together, not facing another battle. When Ethan finally regained consciousness, he found himself in a hospital bed once again, but this time it was different. The pain coursed through him like wildfire, and the realization that he could no longer shield Mia from the truth weighed heavily on his heart. Mia was at his side, tears streaming down her cheeks as she held his hand. "Why didn't you tell me?" she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "I didn't want to worry you," he replied weakly. "You've been through so much already." "But we're in this together," she said fiercely, squeezing his hand tighter. "You can't carry this alone." Ethan took a shaky breath, feeling the weight of her words settle over him like a warm embrace. "You've been my sunlight during the darkest days. When everything felt heavy, your smile pulled me through. You've filled my lonely soul with so much joy and warmth, and I want you to know how deeply I appreciate you. No matter what happens, carry that light with you. You make everything better, and I'm so grateful for every moment we've shared." "Promise me one thing," he said, struggling to keep his eyes open. "You'll keep looking for the little things, Mia, even if I'm not around." Mia nodded, determination shining through her tears. "I promise," she said fiercely. "But you're not going anywhere. We'll fight this together." Days turned into weeks as Ethan fought valiantly against his illness. But despite their hopes and dreams, he succumbed to the darkness that loomed over him. His passing left a deep scar in Mia's heart, a void that felt insurmountable. Yet even in her grief, she held on to the promise she made him. She stayed in the hospital for a while longer, healing from her surgery and adjusting to the new reality without him. The pain was raw and relentless, but she sought out moments of beauty, the way sunlight filtered through leaves or how laughter echoed in empty hallways. Eventually discharged from the hospital, Mia carried with her not just memories of Ethan, but also the lessons he had imparted during their time together. Every time it rained, she would stand outside with her eyes closed, letting droplets soak her skin as she remembered the boy who had found peace standing in the rain beside her.